thank you very much. It's an honor to have President Zelensky of Ukraine.
I do believe this is a good deal. It outlines a framework for companies to start looking into the Ukrainian critical raw materials industry. I do think that it would prevent the Russians from hitting these kinds of sites, but definitely not a tool for solving conflict.
With us, you have the cards.
The Ukrainian legislature is expected to approve a minerals deal with the U.S. this week, an agreement that has generated a good bit of controversy in past months and several different drafts. Well, Pavlo Verkhniatsky is an analyst at the advisory firm Koza in Kyiv. It offers strategic intelligence to businesses and investors around the world. Pavlo, welcome. Let's begin with the Ukraine side of this agreement. After all of this controversy, after all of the disputes, and of course that very controversial appearance from Zelensky in the White House, is this ultimately a good deal for Kyiv?
Hi, Stephen. Well, yes, I do believe this is a good deal. First of all, it outlines a framework for companies to start looking into the Ukrainian critical raw materials industry and other sectors. It more or less provides a safe mechanism managed by the US side, and particularly the DFC, which has a good reputation globally. And finally, it at least provides the route to follow when one wants to start exploring the CRM industry here in this country.
And just to clarify, the DFC is the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. That's a public-private development provider. Before we go further, Pavlo, let's break down some key points of this agreement. First of all, it creates a limited partnership known as the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Each side has an equal share in decision-making. Ukraine puts in half of all revenues from mineral licenses. On the U.S. side, the dollar value of continued military assistance counts as a contribution to the fund, and ostensibly the U.S.'s only contribution. And from what we understand, the fund will be used exclusively for Ukrainian reconstruction for the first 10 years. Significantly, the U.S. gets first dibs on the extracted minerals themselves, but at market rates. Pavlo, you talked about sort of the general agreement. What about those details stands out to you as making this a better deal than maybe some of the earlier versions?
Well, the deal looks fair, first of all. So it provides some equal rights for the parties. Moreover, as far as I can see right now, DFC plays a key role here. So it's kind of a key element in this mechanism. Ukraine is clearly outlined as a country of investment, so it's an object of investment, basically. And nothing goes anywhere else than into the Ukrainian economy. The returns from this activity stays inside Ukraine for at least some time and is reinvested into the country for its recovery. And moreover, it, as far as I can say, it has an offtake element where the companies that would be involved in extracting the minerals would basically have a client that would buy out these the extracted resources. There is a mechanism involved and it includes, or it makes the user of the license to make the first offer to the fund, and it should be on a more preferable condition than any other offer that this user can make. So I think it gives some confidence to companies that are entering this process. So basically, I don't see that anyone would lose here. It only brings benefits to both to Ukraine, the U.S. through DFC, and the parties that would be involved in this process.
Some of the criticisms of this deal, it sets up a framework, obviously, for funding, for bringing in these revenues. When you look at the reality on the ground, though, the security situation is still questionable. The deposits themselves have not been fully mapped out, at least in a modern time frame. Do those criticisms have a point, that there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to the actual deposits, and that the security situation is still far from clear?
Absolutely, that is an important point. However, many of the Ukrainian industrial sites currently, even military sites, are operating throughout all these 3 years of war. Mining sites that are not based on the occupied territories are obviously operational too. I believe that the fact that the U.S. government is involved in this activity through the fund, and it has an equal role in the fund and has an equal interest in the fund, would prevent our enemy to target the sites where the activity of the fund would be involved. I do think that it would prevent the Russians from hitting these kinds of sites. However, we should also realize these projects are not being launched immediately. They require certain preparation. We still need companies to come in and start exploring. True that the data we have right now, on the one hand, on some of the resources, it's classified, so you don't actually know. The public, like business, doesn't know how much of those minerals are there. So I think this information has to be revealed. I believe this has to be open, and but that is up to the government, obviously, to decide. But I think that would be a good step forward. When the exploration actually begins, I believe that that step could happen even while the war is ongoing. The actual drilling or extraction probably would take time. It also depends on what kind of mechanisms, war risk mechanisms would be involved, and I think that is in place. So,
Pavlo, let me break in here. When we look at the gap, between the amount of time that it could take for actual exploration to begin, this agreement obviously falls short of the security guarantees that Ukraine would prefer. It seems to have accepted that. And you make the point that American investment is also a good tether for the U.S. But if we look at it taking years, in essence, for exploration from American companies to arrive there on the land, and potentially what analysts are saying is that Russia needs years to re-equip, does this then still pose an issue that sort of presence of American business, American companies, multinational companies taking advantage of this is not really there in a time frame that's useful for Ukraine?
Well, yes, it takes time. Truly doesn't solve, the situation immediately, doesn't solve the problem immediately. However, the U.S. to a certain extent has flagged their interest for work in Ukraine, for investment in Ukraine, and for benefiting from partnering with Ukraine. So it's a good statement. When we talk about security guarantees, it's a totally different kind of aspect. I think it shouldn't even be in this kind of an agreement. This agreement is about the fund. There's no such thing as security guarantees. You would not outline all the military aspects, for example, in an agreement that is framing an investment fund activity. So that is a totally different thing, in my opinion. So truly, it doesn't solve the security issue immediately, but it makes a great statement that the U.S. is flagging its interest here in Ukraine and is interested in the reconstruction of Ukraine and investing here.
Some of those lithium deposits are in Russian-occupied territories. Is that not correct? Does that not present a problem? Obviously, that wouldn't be covered by this, I would assume.
Well, that is not the only problem with lithium, and that is true that those deposits are in the occupied territories, at least the majority of them. However, it's not only about lithium. The number of resources outlined in this deal is quite long. So, and there are other issues with lithium, for example, that the complexity of extracting this resource specifically in the deposits we have here in Ukraine. So it's not just about lithium. It's obviously there are other more accessible resources, including things like oil and gas that we have in the west of Ukraine. So I think this. I think we should clearly understand that things that are unrealistic remain unrealistic. We don't think that this deal means that now the U.S. is after these deposits on the occupied territories, and this would somehow help us deoccupy them. Well, in some fantasy world, probably, but being realistic, I think the U.S. is currently looking at what they actually can cover now. I think Ukraine is also interested in working on realistic projects. So yes, we shouldn't focus only on things like lithium, even though they are, more or less known, just because lithium is just better known than scandium, for example.
What is the most modern assessment that we have of the value of these mineral rights?
We don't have them. The ones we see in the media, I don't think we can fully trust them. The ones that outline trillions of dollars, I'm not sure they are correct. Just because there has not been an updated assessment for a long time. The one made during the Soviet era, I think those assessments were more or less correct to an extent that in that particular field where it was tested, it was probably correct. But I think there are many fields that have not been covered, and have not been covered since neither then nor since then. So I don't think we have the right assessment right now. Moreover, as I said, most of the information about this is classified as of now. So companies that would be working on these projects would need to probably invest into exploration.
Are there companies that are essentially waiting for the green light from Ukraine to begin projects there, to begin this mapping already?
Well, frankly speaking, I don't see a big queue standing on the border of Ukraine as of now. However, I think businesses are operating within an economic feasibility framework, right? Moreover, they're looking at political risk, especially in the mining industry. We can see major American and European companies operating all over the world, including African countries with quite a complex political risk situation, corruption situation, etc. But they keep on working there. They keep on benefiting from those markets, not the markets, but basically the deposits that are located in those countries, because the markets are mostly global. So I don't think the environment itself would be a problem, but economic feasibility is also something that has been changing for a while. For example, some of the resources have increased in prices 2 times, sometimes 2.5 times throughout the last 5 years, and which makes economic feasibility much higher, and the projects look better despite the complexity of extraction and processing of these materials that are available here in Ukraine. So I think the criticality of these resources and the dependency of the Western countries of the free world on Russian and Chinese resources would probably push governments and consequently companies to start exploring and extracting resources here in Ukraine, despite previous assessments of low economic feasibility of these projects, because it's not always the price that matters, but the criticality of the resources, especially when it comes to geopolitics and security and defense issues.
We know that the EU has also identified these minerals as being very critical for its industries. Where does this leave the EU? Could they benefit from this deal as well?
Well, I do think the EU can still jump in. As far as I can say, as far as I understand, the framework of this fund lets other players join it and benefit from its operations. Presumably, US players would be the first to join. However, only the market will show, only the market activity will show us what would really happen. The framework is there. The framework is there. A lot of people were working on it. The US could be considered as a strong manager of this mechanism. DFC is a credible organization, so I don't see why European companies would not be able, the companies' funds would not be able to join this initiative. I still think there's space for everyone.
Ukraine's reconstruction is tied to these funds, at least from one aspect, from the American side. How long will it take for money to begin coming in here? This is basically the licensing rights should be what brings the money in. That means that even before there's drilling, or it would mean at the very front end, these licenses should be purchased, correct? So that we would see already money coming in before there's actual drilling.
Well, yes, absolutely. You would need a license even to explore. So just to use the deposit, use the field. But to answer the question, how long would it take, would probably, I think it would be premature to say right now. This assessment would not be correct, probably. As I said, there's no huge queue standing on the border of Ukraine right now to start exploring. But we should also understand that there should be a certain period of time when companies would start exploring the environment. They would start researching what is actually going on. They would start researching existing licenses. They would start looking at the players that currently hold licenses, and perhaps I can assume the first deals would be around existing market players holding existing licenses, and maybe even drilling something already. So this would be a more probably risk-averse approach, but this would give an understanding to global market players what is going on, and to test the field, test the environment step by step by working with the existing sites and existing players.
One last question. We know that this appears to be, I should say, a kind of blueprint for the U.S. potentially in its talks with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, for example. There's expectations that a minerals deal could also be pursued there. That's at least what one side is really offering right now. I wonder if you have any thoughts about this, about the use of this kind of minerals deals in this kind of situation.
You mean the mineral deal being an example for other locations?
Sure.
Did I get you wrong?
That's right, yeah. As an example of something to deploy in terms of trying to negotiate some of these conflicts, in terms of trying to get at these minerals.
It's a good question. I, frankly speaking, didn't think about that. We're pretty much focused on what we have right here and right now in Ukraine. However, the mechanism seems to be something new. It has not been there before. So I think first projects will, show us what it's all about, actually, because frankly speaking, despite the availability of the initial document, there are two more coming. There is not yet full clarity of how this mechanism actually would work when the actual private companies would start operating. The distribution of revenues is something, in my opinion, minor to this issue. First, we need to get those revenues. So first, we need to have the companies inside the country and start drilling, start working, start extracting. As I mentioned earlier, the offtake mechanism that is embedded into this agreement could probably be a good stimulus. Could be a good thing for companies to realize there's someone available to buy the extracted goods. But still, this would require private players to start working. So if that works well, if first projects prove to be feasible, the global community would probably see that as a good example, because as I said, the framework is nice, the parties are credible, so why not?
All right,
But definitely not a tool for solving conflicts, in my opinion. It's a part of the puzzle, of course. It's a part of these kinds of deals. But the U.S. as a major global force plays a significant role in by just stating that it has an interest in a country and it considers the country as a strategic partner. So this also makes the U.S. It makes possible for the U.S. to contribute more into the relationship with this kind of country. So I think that it's a proof of value of the partnership, and it enables the country to invest into this relationship. Both countries, actually, of course, but as a big force, we're expecting that the U.S. while seeking these benefits would probably contribute into such aspects as military aid as well.
Okay. Pavlo Verkhniatsky with KOZA, thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephen.